Okay, here's the introductory PowerPoint lecture for my Upward Bound students, West Virginia State University. As promised, I'm going to talk a little bit at this point about the history of psychology. Not really psychology itself as a science, but things that were happening before psychology officially became a science in the late 1800s. In class, I've already mentioned to you the fact that there were sciences such as education, philosophy, medicine, that go way, way back hundreds, even thousands of years that have influenced psychology and have made it what it is today. So that's where we're heading with this. Again, I'm sparing you the in-class lecture here, and I'm thinking this will be a little easier for you. You will have this link forever, so you can watch this, you can take notes on it, you can replay it over and over if you need to make sure that you have what you need. Now, you will be accountable for this information. Again, you will be accountable for this information for the test. The take-home part I'm giving you Friday, as well as the in-class part this Monday. So you'll definitely want to have good notes. Also, I'm going to ask you to submit a copy of your notes on these videos. They will be due this Monday, just so you know. So make sure that you have those ready to turn in to me on Monday. You can make a copy of them and give them to me. If you want to scan them and email them to me, that is fine as well. If you're typing them, cool. You can send them to me via email or turn them in. So just kind of be advised of this. So, my history of psychology professor once said, psychology has a long history but a short past. And you may think, well, that sounds kind of contradictory. What does that really mean? Well, here's what it means. Psychology has a long history because the influences go back thousands of years, like we talked about with medicine and philosophy and sociology and all of these other social sciences that we've talked about. But a short past because officially psychology began in 1879 in a place called Leipzig, Germany. Of course, you have random cute pet pictures that mean nothing for this lecture when you talk about history and theory, so just to break it up a little bit for you. Okay, so like I was saying, this place in Germany called Leipzig, our founding father was a guy by the name of Wilhelm Wundt. It's spelled with a W but pronounced V, Wundt. And we'll talk more about Mr. Wundt as we go, but do understand that he is the founding father, if you will, of psychology. He's the one that started all of this. You do not have to know dates for my exam. I do like to give them to you so you'll know where these people are in history. So we're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s when he was doing his work in psychology. More about Wundt as we progress later. Now, psychology's influences go back several thousand years. And it kind of starts with the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates. If you've ever heard of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors and nurses have to take, it's named for this guy. Now, he lived during the times of ancient Greece, but he's considered to be the first modern doctor or the first modern physician. And his ideas and his abilities were really way ahead of his time. Hippocrates was the first person that we know of to diagnose and recognize paranoia, phobias, and postpartum depression. These are mental health problems that we deal with and we try to get a handle on even today. It's amazing that he recognized this phenomenon called paranoia. And write this in your notes somewhere. If someone is paranoid, they are overly suspicious to the point where it impairs their ability to function. Okay, again, paranoia is a condition of over-suspiciousness to the point where it impairs your overall functioning. That's different than just being a little on guard or just even a little suspicious. We've all been a little suspicious about something for whatever reason. Maybe it's dark and you're alone somewhere and you think, somebody's looking at me, or maybe there's a stranger close, I feel a little bit of danger. That's not really paranoia. Here's an example of paranoia. I had a client who was so afraid that his parents were trying to poison him that he would not eat. He wouldn't eat any food anywhere. For 7 days he went without eating because he was so convinced his parents were trying to kill him. That's paranoia. That was impairing his ability to function. He also recognized phobias. Phobias, and write this down in your notes, are intense and irrational fears. We all probably have a phobia. They may or may not be impairing to our daily functioning. depending on what the phobia is. I shared my needle phobia with you guys in class. You may not be able to read these, and you do not have to know these types of phobias yet. But just for example, the fear of spiders, these are some very common phobias within our culture. The fear of spiders, which is arachnophobia. Social phobia, which is the fear of public speaking or situations that are public. The fear of flying would be aerophobia. The fear of heights would be acrophobia. Brontophobia is the fear of thunderstorms. So those are some pretty common phobias. And also postpartum depression. Some women, after they give birth, develop this chemical depression where they actually don't want to be around their newborn children. They may actually reject them to some extent. And that seems very cruel and odd, and we pass judgment on these mothers. But there's actually a chemical condition, and he actually recognized this postpartum depression several hundred years before the birth of Christ. And he recommended treatments that we may take for granted today, things like baths, relaxation, proper diet, exercise. And we definitely know that there is a relationship between physical health and mental health. So, but he was the first to actually recognize these problems and actually start to recommend treatments for them. Now, Socrates is the first of the ancient Greek philosophers that we'll talk about. You've probably talked about Socrates in other classes. We're talking about, again, several hundred years before the birth of Christ, and you have his times of birth and death there. His idea was the only way that you're going to get to the truth of any matter is by constant questioning. He was considered to be the most intelligent man in his area, in all of Athens. But he would tell you, if you ask him, that he really didn't know the answer to anything. He was bad about questioning the authority figures of Athens. And during that time, that wasn't something that you really did, questioning authority. He was seen as being a disruptive influence on Athens, especially the youth of Athens. You've probably heard the story. He was forced to drink poison hemlock. He was forced to commit suicide, essentially. Now, you may think, well, what does this have to do with psychology? Well, here's what I want you to know, especially for test purposes, is the asterisk point. He established that everything must be open to question. That was his major contribution to psychology. Anything at all, whether we're talking about the nature of love, the nature of warfare, the nature of religion or spirituality, we have to constantly question these ideas and these constructs to understand what they really, really mean. And we do that in psychology. We're constantly questioning our ideas, our hypotheses, our theories, because things change. We can't assume that everything will always stay the same. Plato was the next ancient Greek philosopher that we'll talk about. He lived from 427 to 347 BC, and he set out to rehabilitate the image of Socrates. He thought Socrates was a brilliant man and had everything kind of figured out, but after he was made to drink hemlock, to commit suicide, people thought, well, this guy really, maybe he wasn't such a great guy. So he set out to rehabilitate the image of Socrates. Now, he was one of the first people, Plato that is, to point out that we learn through our senses, seeing, hearing, and we talked about sensation and perception in class. And you might think, well, yeah, that's kind of, duh, right? But, he was one of the first to realize that this was primarily how we learn. Now, his important contribution to psychology, he recognized the importance of individual differences. He lived during a time where it would probably have been in your best interest to be like everybody else. People who were different, who stood out, who thought differently, who challenged authority, were not seen as being, very good members or upstanding members of society. He was one of the first to recognize that, people are different and individual differences are important, and these aren't necessarily bad things, if you will. And that's something that we certainly realize and understand in psychology. Now, the next and the last of the ancient Greek philosophers is a guy by the name of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle came after Plato. He lived from 384 BC to 322 BC. Aristotle was more of a scientist than a philosopher. He did a lot of things that we're not going to talk about in a psychology class. But he did do this, and this is very important. He was the first, and get this point in your notes, the asterisk point here. He was the first person, or one of the first people that we know of, to suggest that people are born what is called tabula rasa. Literally, that translates to blank slate. Basically, what he was saying is that we're all born pretty much like an empty chalkboard or like an empty dry erase board or a blank computer screen, and that the experiences of life are basically going to be the chalk. or the keystrokes or whatever that fill in our board or our computer screen. So basically, he was one of the first to say it's not really biology or genetic predisposition that's going to determine how a person turns out, for better or for worse, but it's the experiences of life that are going to determine how this person or how you are going to turn out. And we still have the nature versus nurture debate. It's the biggest debate that we have in psychology even into today. So, and then we'll end this part with a random cute pet picture. This is the end of the first part of the History of Psychology lecture. Thank you.